AMD stock is up nearly 30% after announcing a massive OpenAI deal. And both AMD and OpenAI believe that AMD stock can hit $1 trillion market cap by the end of 2030. That is a stock price of over $600. Let me explain why in today's episode.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for their subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
All right, so first, let's just start off with the news. OpenAI and AMD announced a strategic partnership to deploy 6 gigawatts of AMD GPUs. The first initial gigawatt is expected to be deployed on the MI450 series GPU starting on the second half of 2026. Now, AMD did have call investors conference after this, and we're going to look at some of the transcripts and informations that I have from there. But to me, they already mentioned revenue is expected in the second half of 2026. Now, if we do some math, let's kind of bring it to NVIDIA because NVIDIA has shared some numbers before. 1 gigawatt of data center equates to roughly 35 to 40 billions of dollars of revenue. Now, AMD tends to have a lower margins, but just let's say increase it instead of 35 to 45, let's do 30 billion. 30 billion is still insane. That 1 gigawatt is more revenue that AMD has done in last year in forms of total revenue. So this news alone should make, in my opinion, AMD a double bagger. If we kind of let's just look at fiscal.ai really quickly. I just want to look at their overall total revenues just so we can see the last 12 months here. I'm going to take away, let's look at last 12 months. Last 12 months of AMD's revenue was 29 billion, right? So just this one customer, when they deploy 1 gigawatt, in theory, can double this company's total revenue from the last 12 months. And that is why I believe AMD or the market is not bullish enough. Now, the great thing about this partnership, it seems to be a 5-year partnership, and I'll explain why, but 10 gigawatts. And it's going to be two multi-generation agreements. So it's not just going to be for the MI450, it's going to be for the MI450, it's going to be for the MI500s, the MI600s, and the list goes on and on. But just from the MI450, like I mentioned, this doubles the company's revenue potential, in my opinion. And in the upcoming days, we are going to see price target hikes, and I believe AMD stock will continue to go up. Now, anything can happen in the short term, right? Anything can really happen in the short term. Stock prices can continue to go down. Maybe we give back some of the gains. Regardless, this solidifies AMD as easily, in my opinion, a $500 billion market cap, and it gives it finally the road of $1 trillion opportunity. Now, you might say, Jose, why didn't you mention stuff like this before? Because I like to look at data and the data that we have now. Now, this also opens up, if OpenAI is willing to do this, why wouldn't other AI companies? We know that AMD is working with a lot of other AI players. Why wouldn't they want to invest or buy AMD GPUs at this capacity of gigawatt deployments? So for me, this solidifies the $1 trillion opportunity for AMD. And I know if you watch my weekly episodes, I'm happy we do the weekly episodes because at the end of this week's episode, you can go back around 9:33. I started talking about the massive investments and innovations happening with AI. I talked about how Sora 2 came out, right? Massive increase in compute going to be needed there. I talked about how Anthropic, even though Anthropic is not a customer of AMD, how they are releasing new AI models. And all this, we also saw Facebook, which was another partnership of AMD. And again, I talked about this on this past weekly, AMD Weekly, how both OpenAI and Meta are increasing the compute needs, and the company that can win dramatically from here was AMD. So for me, I am super excited. I have no intentions of selling my AMD shares, and we'll look at the information a bit. I just want to give my overall thoughts. I am also on Sedona, at Sedona with the family, so I'm just taking a quick hour and a half to record this episode. I'll probably do another episode maybe later this week, and obviously we're going to cover it in this weekend's AMD Weekly. But for me, I have no intentions of selling. If we do see a dip, AMD, in my opinion, is a stock I don't mind dollar cost averaging up with the new data that we have right now. So let's kind of learn a little bit more about this company. And let me say, AMD actually believes their stock, AMD and OpenAI actually believe their stock can go to $600. Now, like we saw, the first 1 gigawatt deployment of AMD Instinct is set to begin in the second half of 2026. Under the agreement, OpenAI will work with AMD as core strategic compute partner to drive large-scale deployments of AMD technology, starting with the AMD Instinct MI450 series and rack-scale AI solution and extending to future generations. Now, this is also great for supply chain, right? We've heard it from other players that it's not that we're chip constrained in the fact that we can't build capacity. What's really the issue is it takes, especially for these rack scale solutions, it takes time for, hey, I need to know how much you need to build. I know how much you're going to order because then I can build the correct supply chain. Now AMD has a year and a half advance, or let's say they release the MI450 in September or maybe even October or August or whatever, they still have about a 1 year's time to prepare that supply chain. That is ample amount of time to make sure this runs smoothly. So now that they have this agreement, they can go to their supply chain players and say, look, I know we personally have never been a big purchaser of a huge supply chain, but we do have this signed agreement from OpenAI that they're going to purchase MI450s. I need you to start building because for a supply chain player, right? And this is crucial. I think investors should know this. As a supply chain player, it's very hard for you to go out there and trust someone, say, you're going to order that much stuff when you've never done it before. Why should we trust you? But having this public information, that supply chain player could say, look, they have that backing. We're going to trust our supply, because if they didn't have that backing, a supply chain player would feel better giving it, for example, to NVIDIA, because NVIDIA does have the backing publicly. But now, because of this backing that AMD has publicly for this massive order, the supply chain will feel a lot more at ease building this type of capacity. Now, AMD and OpenAI have this interesting agreement. So we saw NVIDIA and OpenAI, where NVIDIA was going to invest $100 billion. AMD at the moment, instead of investing actual cash, what they're going to do is give shares, 160 shares to be exact. And for each gigawatt of deployment, they're going to give those trenches of shares. Now, obviously, AMD is going to get some form of equity share in OpenAI, because that's how it works. Instead of them giving actual cash, they're going to give kind of this strategic shares that OpenAI will either hold or sell. Regardless, these come in both trenches of what OpenAI deploys, but also stock shares. And both companies have had to agree with this. The last deployment, which is at the 6 gigawatts, AMD share has to also be $600. Right now, where are we at right now with AMD? AMD right now is $210. And I'll show you the examples, but at $600 would be the last trenches. That means that AMD will be closer to $1 trillion company by then. I actually believe it would be $1 trillion company. So both OpenAI and AMD believe that AMD stock will hit $1 trillion market cap by the end of their agreement. And they did mention the end of the agreement is going to be 2030. So here we can kind of look at the 8K report where they discussed that a little bit. We can see that they have the GPUs, the trenches are contingent based on the 6 gigawatts, but also vesting of warranted shares are further subject to achievement of company stock price targets that escalate to $600 per share for the final tranche and stock performance threshold. Additionally, each tranche of vested warrant share is subject to the fulfillment of certain other technical and commercial conditions prior to the exercise. Obviously, it's not just stock price. Like we mentioned, AMD, OpenAI has to be releasing these gigawatts at scale. And there also has to be some form of revenue from both players. But regardless, we see that AMD, by the end of 2030, both OpenAI and AMD expect this stock to be $1 trillion market cap. Now, it's funny. Usually, again, I hear that I'm not bullish enough on AMD. I believe the market now is not bullish enough in the long-term opportunity. In the short term, anything can happen, but in the long term, I am super, super excited. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Take care, have a good day, and see you all next time.